I'm David Ortega, and I am a food economist and professor at Michigan State University, where I hold the Noel Stuckman Chair in Food Economics and Policy. So, my work here is really centered around understanding the economics of food, as well as better understanding decision making in agri-food systems. So, how food gets from farms all the way to our plates, and the choices that are made along the way by consumers, by farmers, but also by policymakers. So I also study what shapes food prices, trade, agricultural supply chains, and I care very deeply about making those insights accessible and also very relevant for the general public. I was originally born in Maracaibo, Venezuela. So that's in the western part of the country. And for those of you that aren't aware where Venezuela is, it's a country in the northern coast of South America and the Caribbean. And that's where I grew up before moving to the US at age 10, when my parents moved our family for them to be able to pursue graduate education. So we settled in Gainesville, Florida, where I went to middle school, high school, and eventually attended college at the University of Florida. And really, agriculture and food have always been a part of my life. So my grandfather growing up, and even to this day, he's in his 90s, still farms back home in Venezuela. I grew up watching my grandmother, my mom, my aunts cook. And so I've carried that love for food and the curiosity about food, how it's produced and how it gets to us, with me ever since I was a kid. And that's what I study now. So I'm pretty fortunate to be able to pursue that in my professional life. Well, so I think when it comes to some of the achievements, what I'm most proud of from my work is that it has informed real decisions and, decisions at various levels, whether it be that a producer here in Michigan is making more informed decisions because some of the work that I've done, or a consumer is better able to navigate the grocery store and make better food choices. But I've also had the opportunity and really the privilege to testify before both the US Senate and House Agriculture Committees. So my work has informed policy, both at the state, but also the federal level. And I would say that I'm especially honored to be this year's recipient of the Borlaug Cast Communication Award. The Borlaug name means a lot to me. I still remember when I was a kid in school learning about Norman Borlaug and the Green Revolution. So to be associated with his legacy and also with CAST, and also to join the ranks of past award winners is deeply humbling and really an overwhelming honor. And a lot of that has to do with my work on outreach, on communication, that has really helped inform decisions and also policy. So these two things, I would say, go hand in hand. Public engagement isn't always easy. You're visible, you're open to scrutiny. Some people disagree with what I have to say. I welcome a dialogue. I welcome an exchange in a lot of the work that I do in my outreach, in my media work, as long as we can keep that civil and constructive. I think one of the biggest secrets that I have about this type of work is that I'm still learning. So I approach these conversations with humility, with an open mind, and they make me a better researcher and a better communicator. I think another challenge that comes to mind is the amount of misinformation that is out there. There's a lot of it floating around, especially when it comes to food, when it comes to economics, with policy and politics. But that's exactly why communication matters so much. We have to take the narrative and provide people with accessible, factual information so that they can make better and more informed decisions. I think science communication helps bridge the gap between research and people's lived experiences, their everyday lives. And so if people don't understand how the food system works, or if they're misinformed about science issues or about our food system, then they can't make good decisions, or they can't hold their policymakers accountable. I think one of the reasons why misinformation thrives right now is because there's a void of information. People are yearning for information, and academics don't always like to engage with the public. We're good at doing the science, doing the research, talking with each other, but not so great about making sure that information, that knowledge, that science gets out there to the general public. And we're relatable people. We're not in some ivory tower like sometimes we're portrayed to be. We have the same lived experiences that other individuals have in society. And we need to make sure that we're engaging, we're talking with people, not talking to people. And I found storytelling to be really powerful, especially what I call data-driven storytelling. Using data and findings to bring real world experiences to life. And so those conversations that I have with farmers when I go to the grocery store, it's not a quick trip for me when I go to the grocery store. I'm talking to the produce manager, the shoppers, just to better understand what they're doing. They shape how I communicate, they inform my work and make it much more relatable. And so that's why I think focusing on agricultural science communication is so important. Ever since I started in my professional career, I had done a little bit of media engagement just because I'm a firm believer in the tripartite mission of the land-grant system. There's research, there's education and teaching, and then there's outreach. So I'm a product of the land-grant system. I went to the University of Florida, I went to Purdue for graduate school, and I'm now here at Michigan State. And so I had some experience with that, but I think it really started during the COVID-19 pandemic, which is when I really saw a need and a gap. People were confused about food prices, about agricultural and food supply chains, and what was happening. I remember talking to a few folks a few years back in the midst of COVID, and they would see that milk prices were going up, and then farmers were having to let their milk run off into the ground, or meat prices were spiking. We saw what was happening in the meat processing plants, yet livestock producers were having to depopulate their livestock. And so there was really a need there. And I really wanted to sort of demystify the food system. And I really felt a responsibility to explain what I could in terms of what was happening. And so I started to share posts on social media, trying to be clear, factual, and approachable. And that really led to broader media interest as well as public engagement. And we've seen a number of shocks and a number of events that have affected the food system ever since then that I've been able to engage and share my insights. Yeah, so my goal in all of this is to help people make more informed decisions, help them better understand the food system and make decisions that are informed about what they eat, how they engage with food policy. And, food is so personal, yet I think it's also so often misunderstood. So if my work can help someone better understand where their food comes from, or how global events affect grocery prices or affects farmers' livelihood, then I would consider that to be a pretty big win. I will say, embrace the power of storytelling. In food and agriculture, we have a terrific advantage, and that is that food is universal. It connects all of us. We may have our differences culturally, could be politically, but food is something that can bring us together, is sort of a great equalizer. It can bring people to have conversations. So I would say, don't waste that opportunity. Also, find the human side of your work and make it relatable. One other piece of advice here that I think is very important is to listen. So good communication is just as much about listening as it is about speaking. And by listening, you get to understand individuals, what their challenges are. It doesn't just make you a better communicator, but it can also make you a better researcher. Well, so I want to keep learning from others, first of all. I am a curious person, and I also want to continue telling stories that help illustrate some of these complex issues that we're facing. So I think going forward in the next few years, I plan to lean even more into outreach, into communication, into policy work. And I really see this as a growing part of my mission. But I would also say something that I'm looking forward to is I also want to help others become better communicators. And that's something that I'm excited to explore further in the coming years, especially in academia, is really helping to train and inspire the next generation of science communicators, of communicators in economics, and in particular in food economics, because it's so important in today's environment. I think When it comes to food and agriculture, the land grant mission is such a great philosophy in terms of bringing the various aspects of research, teaching, and outreach and how synergistic they are. And it highlights the importance that communication plays in science because we have to ensure that the work that we're doing, whether you are at a land grant university or not, gets out to the people who can use that information to make decisions, whether that be a farmer, whether it be a consumer, whether it be a US senator or a representative that is looking for information on an issue. It's really important that the work that we're doing as academics, as researchers, makes it out into the real world because that's when it can really have its most impact.